Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Earth Central, the podcast where we go over the stories and concepts that pertain to climate mitigation and people who help to see that happen. Today, I have a special guest here with us, Manuel Coco, who happens to be an expert in everything that pertains to climate mitigation. And I'm going to let Manuel introduce himself.
Hi everyone. Hi Olia, thanks for the introduction and very nice to have this chance to talk. So I've been working in sustainability, climate change mitigation for over 15 years from public organizations like the Spanish Trade Commission, the World Bank, UN organizations, now with the German Cooperation Agency. But I also work for a long time, like over 10 years for the private sector, private consultancy providing services also to corporates, always in relation to the energy transition, climate change mitigation, a little bit of adaptation also, and climate policy, and all aspects related to corporate sustainability as well. So I'm very happy to be with you today.
Thank you for being with us. So, Manuel, I think the first question that that I would like you to answer to kick off our conversation is, as an expert in the field when it comes to energy transition, climate mitigation, all that, do you feel like we as society, as in like businesses and governments, do you feel like we're doing enough when it comes to climate mitigation? So, think about policies, regulation, all that, and overall commitments that businesses are making.
Okay, so I think that, and most people understand this, like clearly we are not doing enough. To be very frank and to be very clear, we are not doing enough collectively. But let me qualify and I'll elaborate a little bit on this. From one side, we can say that, for example, in terms of regulation, there are very good signs, promising signs, and step forwards, particularly within the EU, the whole regulatory framework, the sustainable framework, the disclosure regulations, the EU taxonomy, the Fit for 55, and how it has been recently updated to increase the ambition. These are all like the discussion on the regulation of the electric vehicles, the hydrogen. There are many aspects that are moving forward in the Europe. Similarly, in the US and in Canada, well, particularly in the US under the Biden administration, there has been really an acceleration with the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really billions of dollars of incentives towards green technologies. And even in the rest of the world, we see, for example, the Chinese, they develop their emission trading systems, they have a taxonomy. ASEAN, as a collective organization of the Southeast Asian countries, they have a taxonomy, and each country is developing their own national taxonomies. Latin American countries are developing their taxonomies. These are all very good signs and very good steps in the right direction. However, the regulation so far and the pace at which this regulation is advancing is not fast enough. If we really look at, for example, the International Energy Agency net zero pathway, which is one of the most credible actually, and of course the UNFCCC, IPCC kind of scenarios, we are looking at the emissions, global emissions are still growing. We should have already peaked, and we are not going to peak before 2030 or 2028 in some of the most optimistic estimates. And this is actually compromising our pathway to meet the Paris Agreement willingness target of staying within 1.5 degrees of global warming. It is not completely compromised. It is not impossible that we are not going to make it, but it's very unlikely that we are going to make it. Another element of response is what is happening in voluntary commitments, what the companies are doing, whether there is like a compliance regulation or not. Again, there are very good examples, but the picture is even more mixed with policy, in the sense that there are a few companies that are really advanced. Let's say they really ambitiously move forward their decarbonization path. They follow one of the best practices in this space is the Science-Based Target Initiative. in which companies they really they have to voluntarily commit to disclose and structure their internal corporate climate strategies in a way that they decarbonize very fast, and they communicate and report about it in a very transparent, very clear way. So there are very few companies, particularly, for example, some European multinationals in the US, many of the Silicon Valley IT kind of sector players, they are usually very good in this. There are some outliers like Amazon, like Patagonia. There are some companies that are really, really very good. Unilever is considered quite good. Some of in the agro industry, like the Nestle's and this type of companies. But the vast majority, if you look at FT 500 and FT 2000 companies, the biggest companies in the world, the vast majority, they have some sort of climate target. They are doing something about climate change, but they are not doing even closely to be enough. And there are also many companies, and in the last 12 months, we have seen a lot of scandals coming out of companies that are clearly greenwashing, or even
Right.
companies like in the oil and gas that are rolling back their targets that they already committed to, and they are kind of now completely rolling back, increasing investment in oil and gas and other things. So we are far from being where we want to be, and yeah, like the picture is still very mixed.
So there are two questions that I would like to ask connected to that. So the first one is somebody working with the satellite imagery. What we've heard is that there is a new constellation of satellites that are about to be launched that are going to collect very precise data when it comes to emissions and kind of like the state of the atmosphere. And the speculation is that once that data is collected, the real picture is going to be a lot worse than what have been communicated by now. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, this is a very good point. Actually, well, to be honest, I'm not. I don't consider myself being very pessimistic in the sense that sometimes there are research like some university researchers or independent NGOs that are in the science space that they look at some of the claims or some of the, let's say, the details of both government or corporate kind of claims about climate action, and there are usually you see a lot of reports of companies that have overplayed or overstated what they were doing, and that's actually what I was mentioning just before. There is this greenwashing movement, but there is also a lot of scrutiny increasingly, and people are very sensitive to this, and particularly all the societies, particularly in some developed countries, but in general, I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia. Now I'm in Morocco, and the societies are very aware, and now since there is a lot of sensitivity about this issue, and they are looking closely at what companies are doing. So many companies that are actually advancing PR and CSR, they are very careful actually of doing things halfway or doing things on the surface, because the backlash can be very bad, and some of the companies, they have taken huge backlash in terms of things. What is clear is that remote sensing and the increased use of satellite imagery and solutions like satellite images based solutions will facilitate this scrutiny, will make it more transparent, will make it also more scalable, cheaper, and replicable everywhere. And like a remote, it can be done remotely at a much lower cost than actually now that they still need to go to remote places and check. So this will improve. I don't know if it's gonna transform the way the companies themselves are behaving, but indirectly there will be tools at the disposal of many organizations and many structures that will be able to monitor much on real time and with much more precise data. So that will force indirectly the companies to actually let's say, behave better or be more transparent and more thorough in their climate commitments.
I get that. So the second question that I wanted to ask relates to what you were saying earlier, and like we see companies, making commitments, making claims, and then rolling back on them and investing more money into like oil and gas and all that. So do you think it's just them not seeing like immediate results? Because funny enough, for me, that sounds like somebody who's saying, okay, I want to lose 10 pounds. But that goal is like so far away that it's a lot easier to, I don't know, eat another cookie just today because it's like immediate gratification versus that long term goal. So, is that what, in your opinion, is happening to the companies?
Uh, well, I mean, this is it can get very philosophical. The answer to your question, it's a very good question. In my opinion, it's really, and this is a very complicated thing to solve because you can make market-based incentives. You can come up like, for example, voluntary carbon markets is an example. There are many others. Things that can drive the, let's say, standard capitalistic society and companies which are traditionally looking at maximizing their
The
basically
profits?
their benefit in relation to the company towards doing the right thing. But the problem is more in the short term versus long term. The issue I see is that particularly and even if there have been a little bit of improvements in this sense, but this was very obvious in the crisis of 2006, 2007, 2008 with the subprimes, mortgages, and all that. Like most of the corporates, and in particular the financial sector, is based on like the remuneration, the compensation package, and the career of the particular people that are in decision-making positions are very short-term. They have very short-term targets, and they are retributed and they are compensated based on the results short-term. So their vision is very short-term. Even if they have long-term corporate strategies that go to 2040, 2050, at the end of the day, if you are a CEO of a company today, you need to look at what the stockholders and your board basically is going to tell, they are going to fire you if you don't deliver in the next 6 months. So
Right.
that's your main concern. And it's very difficult to move away from that logic. There are some companies that they try to embed that in their corporate strategy and in their governance. Like, so it's not the person, but actually a more collective kind of wisdom of the company that can actually strengthen this long-term vision. Because at the end of the day, for the viability of the company in the long run, unless you are a climate change denier, which allegedly there are some, like some
Right.
in the oil and gas, but most of the companies now, they understand in the long run they need to decarbonize. It's actually for their own sustainability. And climate change, as I say many times, is not anymore a matter of PR or CSR. It's actually a key clear competitiveness and strategy kind of issue. Like, you need to be on the forefront in this battle, just especially if you are business to consumer, but even if you are business to business, you need your products to be low carbon and your image as a company to be green, because your clients are demanding that you are so. So if you are like you want to be a market leader in any segment, in almost any industry today, basically there is no way of out of being active and ambitious on climate change. But today it's still the person that is in charge may have a very short-term target of maximizing profit, and this is what we have seen with the oil and gas companies rolling back, their targets, because they wanted to maximize their profits with the current energy prices are high, and they wanted to really maximize, and investing in oil and gas today, which may slow down and compromise their targets long term, but for them in the short term they get the bonus this year. That's the point.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's always the battle of this, like, oh, let me just get the short term benefit and I don't care about the long term because maybe I won't even be there anymore, in long term. And I think what you brought up about, the consumers, especially Gen Z, they're all climate conscious. And they're going to be, the most powerful buyers a few years from now. So if companies don't hurry up and, like I said, make their products carbon neutral or low carbon, I think they're gonna have hard time selling it. Like, look at all the like big producers of clothes like Zara, H&M, and all that. None of them are even close to being carbon neutral. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not wishing them to go out of business, but I think they definitely need to change the model because there's just not a lot of good that's coming out of it, and it's just not sustainable. But you touched upon voluntary carbon markets, and this is the subject that seems to be very controversial. So, there are a lot of proponents of this, a lot of opponents of it, because when it comes to opponents, they're all saying, well, we cannot just say, let's protect this piece of forest and say that it's going to offset our emissions today. And because this is quote unquote bullshit, because, the forest was still going to be there. Maybe, or maybe not. But what the proponents are saying is that we don't protect the nature today. We're clearly not going to have any nature left in the future. So, what's your take on that?
Yes, actually, no, that's a very good point. And this year, particularly, there have been a lot of controversy with the voluntary carbon markets. In particular, some projects that were forest conservation projects that were analyzed, and some people were criticizing them, saying like they actually were grossly overestimating the
The
carbon
benefits, yeah. Hmm.
avoidance potential that they had, and they have been selling credits basically on hot air, basically credits that were not really there, or only a part of them were there. And natural-based solutions and voluntary carbon markets, it's a very technical, it really gets extremely technical and complicated. Luckily, there are solutions like yours that help to actually decompose and facilitate data analysis and stuff, but it is extremely complex. It is very costly and very difficult to actually measure. You do statistical approaches to forecast the growth of plants and trees. It depends per species. You have arithmetic equations. I don't want to get very technical, but it's extremely complex. So what the most voluntary carbon market players are saying is like, okay, we hear you. I mean, yes, what we do is not perfect, but let's not make perfect the enemy of improving.
Right.
We are criticizing and now giving this broad society impression that voluntary carbon market is like a big scam, and that's not true. The players that are there, they are integral players. They are trying to do their best, and they are just evolving. If we look at projects that were registered 10 years ago, and we look at projects today, the methodologies that were used 10 years ago compared to today, they are much more stringent, and there have been improvements. Now they have these carbon buffers. So for forestry projects, you have to allocate a buffer of credits, because you risk, there is always this risk of leakage or non-permanence. And I don't want to get technical, but these are criteria that a project needs to ensure, to make sure that, for example, if you are protecting a forest, because you are enforcing protection in this forest, but there is another forest
That's gonna
next
hurt.
door, and people that are illegal loggers that were coming here, that now this is protected, but they go here and they're still cutting trees. So the overall effect for the global warming
It's
is
the
the same.
same.
They just
Yeah.
go somewhere else. Or you can protect a forest, but then look what happened in California in the summer. Or in Europe, actually in Southern Europe, there is a big fire, and all that carbon is up in the air
Right.
and it's in the atmosphere. So there are many challenges, but the point here, and I think the most important thing to understand, and this is all voluntary carbon market players say that, but also like the best practices incorporate climate action, like the Science-Based Target Initiative, the Task Force for the Scale Up of the Voluntary Carbon Market, or the Integrity Council on the Voluntary Carbon Markets. They all say the same, and is that companies, they need to, number one, reduce their existing emissions. That's the number one priority, and that's they should do first. So look at your value chain and see how you can reduce. Can you source renewable energy electricity? Can you transform your productions, your systems, and your sites in carbon neutral, or at least reduce maybe 80%, 90% your abate clearly your emissions? And then, because some companies, like for example, you're a steel producer, you're a cement producer, you can absorb some of the carbon. There is the carbon capture,
Carbon
but
capture. Yeah.
I don't want to go there. Yeah, it's very controversial. I mean, it's very dubious that it will be viable in the long run and at scale. But anyways, there are technologies that you can use to reduce in every single sector. But then you will still have maybe some players, they are never going to be carbon neutral. So there is still going to be an emission that you will have to, if you want to keep producing, you will have to kind of emit, and then you can compensate. So for what you cannot reduce, you compensate. But it's very clear the order of priority. So that's number one. And this is many people, they forget or they don't say that. And everybody understands this. So voluntary carbon market is only a little part of the solution. The big part of the solution is corporates reducing their own emissions. And then the second part is voluntary carbon markets, differently to compliance markets, like the European Emission Trading Scheme. You have the dimension of quality of a carbon credit. So you have low quality carbon credits and you have high quality carbon credits. For example, you have reduction carbon credits are better than avoidance carbon credits.
Right.
Nature-based and remote kind of community center carbon credits, like improved cook stoves, water filtering in sub-Saharan Africa, they are better than utility scale or methane capture in a landfill or energy efficiency in an industry kind of type of carbon credit. And this is reflected in the price. So carbon credits, they are not all created equal in voluntary carbon markets, and there are credits that trade at $20, $25 per ton, $30 per ton, and some credits that trade at $1, $2, $3 per ton. So when a company buys carbon credits, they can also say, I'm not buying just any carbon credits, I'm buying high quality integer voluntary carbon credits that I am paying more for, and I'm using those to compensate the part of my emissions that I cannot reduce. So bringing all of this together, I think it's unavoidable that voluntary carbon markets will play a role. This role is going to increase, and actually the most forecasts say that by 2030 voluntary carbon markets will grow 10 to 15 fold, and by 2050
Okay.
they will grow 100 to 200 fold. If we just look at net zero commitments of the companies that already said we want to get net zero, to look at what they can abate themselves and the part that they need to buy, and we're talking about 100 to 200 billion by 2050 per year. I mean, dollars per year.
That's a huge market.
Of course, then we look at what is the cost of climate mitigation. It's in the range of trillions per year.
Right.
So it's a different order of magnitude, but there are plenty of opportunities for voluntary carbon market players, and it is a solution that we cannot leave apart. We cannot leave to the side. We need offsetting on top of everything else.
Yeah, of course, because I don't think every company can just completely avoid emissions, right? Like there is not such a company that can just avoid.
Some companies, it depends on the type of the company. For example, IT companies, they are very green, but it's also because it's very easy, because the emissions are very small.
Right.
If you are a steel manufacturer, you cannot ask also a steel manufacturer to sell flowers. I mean, they are not going to reinvent their business.
The business model, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What you can ask is to do the lowest carbon possible way, and then what they cannot do, they need to compensate. Maybe they create projects themselves, maybe they purchase offsets, but there is a thing called insetting, which is in your own value chain. You basically source from your providers in a way that you reduce your emissions. I mean, there are many ways of doing it, but definitely they need to take action. That's
for sure. Yeah. So when it comes to the voluntary carbon markets and all of the avoided deforestation credits and all that, there is a flip side of it. So people, so not just planting trees and protecting them, but making sure that the production of certain products is not affecting the forest intactness. And so we're talking about the recent regulation that EU has released, I guess about a year ago from now, that's going to go into force quite soon, EUDR, European Union Anti-Deforestation Regulation. Do you believe it's actually going to be effective? And do you think that the regulation like that actually mandates the use of independent objective data such as satellite imagery to prove that the production of, for example, palm oil or soy did not cause deforestation? Will this basically, I guess, leak to other areas where other forms of reporting are going to demand companies to use independent data on top of their own like factory measurements and all that?
Again, this is a very good question. Actually, as far as I know, the EU deforestation-free regulation was entered into force in June this year. But we must say also to understand that this is not, let's say, a policy that comes out of the blue, but it's actually an update on an existing previous regulation. There was, there have been a lot of in the EU, for example, the European Green Deal touched a little bit on sourcing deforestation-free products. There was a EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 that was developed, I think, last year or 2 years ago. And most importantly, there is this farm to fork strategy, which is also looking at bioproducts and ensuring that the sourcing of the products are deforestation free and clean. There is an international framework for timber regulation also that this
EUTR, yeah.
yes. So what I mean is this is not like now suddenly the EU is looking at this and before nobody cared where the timber was coming from. But again, like everything else, it's these regulations are incrementally becoming more and more stringent and are forcing companies to really look into this more in detail. Replying to your question is whether this is going to mandate companies to use satellite image. I don't see the need, actually the obligation to use satellite image as something that is going to be like suddenly expanded everywhere. But what is definitely happening, and I mentioned it in my first question before, is that because remote sensing and satellite imaging is very powerful, it helps you really to understand with a granularity and a real-time kind of a quality that was impossible before. It's going to be extremely useful, both from the companies that want to comply with the regulation, and also with the people that are actually trying to enforce the regulation. And using this type of solutions makes it very simple and almost explicit to demonstrate that what you are sourcing is proper or things. So whether it's mandatory or not, it's not really the point, I think. But what is really, I think, very likely going to happen is that these solutions will be used more and more, even just because it's a very cheap and practical way of actually ensuring. Like, for example, you have a fine if you don't comply with the regulation, or you face even being banned or something like that. You want to spend a little money to actually have a solution that allows you to be almost 100% sure
Right.
that this is there. So even if it's not mandated by regulation, by practice, the use of remote sensing is gonna explode, I think. Not only for deforestation, but as you were asking in your question, this is gonna be very rapidly expand to anything linked to agroforestry, agricultural supply chains, any products like textile, like natural textile, any products that are sourced naturally, palm oil, like it's been in Indonesia cause of deforestation. So anything that can affect land use and therefore, can be monitored very easily with satellite imagery. It's open field for the use of or an increased use of these solutions.
Right. And I feel like we could record a whole episode just dedicated to that. But so far, I think it's been a very enlightening discussion, at least for myself, and I'm sure for our listeners, because they're always looking for more of a, kind of like independent opinion on matters like that. I guess as a closing statement, what would you like to share with everybody when it comes to climate crisis and climate mitigation, all that?
Well, maybe to end on a positive note, I think that the last International Energy Agency updated report on the net zero scenario indicates that we are actually going through the transition, that the transition is happening. especially this is true with energy, green energy generation, electricity. All the grids in the world, particularly in in developed countries, but also in developing countries, are becoming greener, and the EV production, batteries and cars are skyrocketing. I think that by 2030, we are not even aware, but we will see a very, very transformed road transport sector and a very transformed energy generation sector. So we need to be optimistic, but we need to also, like for all climate activists, all, every people that have children, I would say, for me it's very important. I just had a child, and I'm very, I'm even more motivated now to keep working on these issues, because I think we need to double down the efforts and continue, because we are very far from actually what we want to be, where we want to be. But at least we are finally, after many years of lagging behind and hesitating, it looks like there is this critical mass of regulations and voluntary action that is starting to take momentum.
Right.
And towards 2030, we really need to kind of speed it up and continue. So continue pushing, keep demanding your governments, your products that you buy as a consumer, as a citizen, and keep fighting for a transition for the future of our children.
What a beautiful closing statement. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you for being with us today. We're going to link your LinkedIn profile to the episode description. Is there any other way that, like, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, how could they get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, my LinkedIn page is always very active, and I get a lot of interaction. I'm very happy to interact there. So I'm very happy to be in the community. So don't hesitate to come to me with any ideas or suggestions. It was a pleasure to be here, and good luck to also Orbify and your amazing product, which is very, very promising, and is very, very important also to as a solution to all this that we were discussing today.
Thank you, Manuel, and hope to see you soon.